He thought he was the provider. That's what Alex believed when he boarded a flight to Europe with a leather briefcase in one hand and long-term plans in his head. He believed providing meant transferring money, securing contracts, building portfolios, expanding assets. He believed presence could be postponed. Texas, however, does not postpone reality. Inside their Houston home, late afternoon heat pressed against the windows, heavy and unapologetic. The air conditioner hummed steadily, fighting a battle it barely won. Jane stood barefoot in the kitchen, one hand resting against the counter, the other holding her phone. 7 months pregnant, alone. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't dramatic. She was still. Her thumb hovered over her banking app again, refreshing the screen as if patience might change mathematics. Available balance, 20.34 cents. She blinked once, then again. The rest of the transfer read, pending, processing, delayed. She exhaled slowly through her nose. $20.34. Enough for gas. Maybe groceries if calculated carefully. Not enough to feel settled. Her belly shifted gently beneath her loose summer dress. The baby pressed against her ribs, as if reminding her that life doesn't pause because numbers look small. Jane placed the phone on the counter. She stared at it, not with panic, with awareness. Upstairs, the nursery was half finished. A crib frame leaned against the wall. Boxes of baby wipes sat unopened. A rocking chair waited to be assembled. She walked toward the living room window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. Outside, the Texas sky stretched wide and indifferent. Neighbors moved through their evening routines. Lawn sprinklers clicked rhythmically across warm grass. Life continued. Inside, she picked up her phone again. $20.34. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the moment. Her husband was somewhere over the Atlantic by now, reviewing presentation slides, adjusting his tie, thinking about opportunity. She was thinking about stability. Earlier that morning, before he left, Alex had kissed her forehead gently. "You'll be fine," he said. He believed it. Jane believed it too. But belief and reality don't always hold hands. She leaned against the counter, carefully, and whispered to herself, half amused, half reflective, "Okay, so this is what we're working with. No dramatics, no anger, just recalibration. Because strength isn't loud. It's strategic." Her phone buzzed briefly with a flight notification update he had forwarded hours ago. She didn't open it. Instead, she opened her notes app, a blank page. She stared at the blinking cursor. Outside, heat shimmered across pavement. Inside, something quieter was forming. $20 wasn't a crisis, but it was a mirror. And mirrors tell truths we sometimes overlook. Jane rested both hands over her stomach now, steadying herself as the baby shifted again. "You good," she murmured softly. She wasn't talking to herself. She was talking to her child. And in that moment, something settled inside her. Not fear, not resentment, just clarity. Because sometimes the loudest wake-up call isn't shouting. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been called strong at a moment when you didn't want to be strong? Have you ever smiled and said, "I'm fine"? Not because you were fine, but because explaining your disappointment felt heavier than carrying it quietly. Jane had been called strong her entire life. Strong in classrooms where she was the only one who looked like her. Strong in boardrooms where confidence had to arrive before doubt could enter. Strong in relationships where love required patience. Strong. But strength is often a compliment that hides expectation, and expectation can feel lonely. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a glass of cold water and her phone face down beside her. The house felt larger than usual. Silence expands when you're the only adult inside it. Upstairs, a faint creak from the unfinished nursery reminded her of all the things still waiting. She leaned back, slowly, and closed her eyes for a moment. Earlier that week, during a prenatal appointment, couples had filled the waiting room. Some argued gently over stroller brands. Some held hands. Some scrolled their phones in comfortable silence. Jane had adjusted her purse strap and checked in alone. She hadn't complained. She hadn't dramatized it. Because she understood ambition. She respected drive. She loved that Alex aimed high. But love also measures presence, and presence cannot be wired across time zones. Her phone lit up briefly with a text from Alex sent hours earlier. "Boarding now. Call you when I land. She stared at the notification without opening it. He wasn't careless. He wasn't cruel. He believed he was doing what mattered. But let me ask you this. Is providing the same thing as protecting? Is sending money the same thing as standing beside someone when they feel vulnerable? Jane opened her banking app one more time. $20.34. Pending. Processing. Temporary. Yet symbolic. Sometimes the issue isn't the amount. It's the message timing sends. She thought back to that morning at the airport drop-off lane. The sun barely risen. Air still cool. He had placed his hands gently on her shoulders before stepping toward security. You know I'm doing this for us. She nodded. I know. And she did know. But knowing doesn't erase feeling. In the passenger seat during the drive home, she had placed one hand over her belly and one on the steering wheel, absorbing the quiet. Pregnancy doesn't just change your body. It sharpens your awareness. You begin to think in layers. Security, stability, emotional climate, legacy. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen hours later, she tapped her fingers lightly against the table. Not anxious, reflective. If you've ever sat in a house meant for two people and felt the weight of silence pressing closer than usual, you understand this moment. If you've ever told yourself, I can handle it, while secretly wishing someone would insist on handling it with you, you understand this moment. Jane wasn't falling apart. She was taking inventory, and inventory is powerful because it forces clarity. The baby kicked suddenly, sharp enough to make her inhale quickly. She smiled softly, despite herself. All right, she whispered. You got opinions already. Her laughter filled the room briefly, then faded. Outside, a truck passed down the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Texas life continued without ceremony. Inside, Jane picked up her phone again. Not to check the balance this time, to open her camera. She held it at arm's length and studied her reflection on the screen. Hair pulled back casually. No makeup. Tired eyes, but steady. She didn't record. Not yet. She just observed. Because sometimes the first step in transformation isn't action. It's acknowledgement. And acknowledgement begins with honesty. She wasn't angry at Alex. She wasn't plotting revenge. She wasn't even deeply upset. She was aware. Aware that partnership requires more than intention. Aware that motherhood was approaching fast. Aware that vulnerability deserves reinforcement. Her thumb hovered over the record button. She hesitated, then lowered the phone. Not tonight. Tonight was about processing, about grounding, about understanding the difference between independence and isolation. And if this moment feels familiar to you, if you've ever been left to hold strength alone, stay with me, because this story isn't about money. It's about evolution. It's a number on a screen, $20.34. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been called strong at a moment when you didn't want to be strong? Have you ever smiled and said, I'm fine, not because you were fine, but because explaining your disappointment felt heavier than carrying it quietly? Jane had been called strong her entire life. Strong in classrooms where she was the only one who looked like her. Strong in boardrooms where confidence had to arrive before doubt could enter. Strong in relationships where love required patience. Strong. But strength is often a compliment that hides expectation. And expectation can feel lonely. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a glass of cold water and her phone face down beside her. The house felt larger than usual. Silence expands when you're the only adult inside it. Upstairs, a faint creak from the unfinished nursery reminded her of all the things still waiting. She leaned back slowly and closed her eyes for a moment. Earlier that week, during a prenatal appointment, couples had filled the waiting room. Some argued gently over stroller brands. Some held hands. Some scrolled their phones in comfortable silence. Jane had adjusted her purse strap and checked in alone. She hadn't complained. She hadn't dramatized it, because she understood ambition. She respected drive. She loved that Alex aimed high. But love also measures presence, and presence cannot be wired across time zones. Her phone lit up briefly with a text from Alex sent hours earlier. Boarding now. Call you when I land. She stared at the notification without opening it. He wasn't careless. He wasn't cruel. He believed he was doing what mattered. But let me ask you this. Is providing the same thing as protecting? Is sending money the same thing as standing beside someone when they feel vulnerable? Jane opened her banking app one more time. $20.34. Pending. Processing. Temporary, yet symbolic. Sometimes the issue isn't the amount. It's the message timing sends. She thought back to that morning at the airport drop-off lane. The sun barely risen, air still cool. He had placed his hands gently on her shoulders before stepping toward security. "You know I'm doing this for us." She nodded. "I know." And she did know, but knowing doesn't erase feeling. In the passenger seat during the drive home, she had placed one hand over her belly and one on the steering wheel, absorbing the quiet. Pregnancy doesn't just change your body. It sharpens your awareness. You begin to think in layers: security, stability, emotional climate, legacy. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen hours later, she tapped her fingers lightly against the table, not anxious, reflective. If you've ever sat in a house meant for two people and felt the weight of silence pressing closer than usual, you understand this moment. If you've ever told yourself, "I can handle it," while secretly wishing someone would insist on handling it with you, you understand this moment. Jane wasn't falling apart. She was taking inventory, and inventory is powerful because it forces clarity. The baby kicked suddenly, sharp enough to make her inhale quickly. She smiled softly, despite herself. "All right," she whispered. "You got opinions already." Her laughter filled the room briefly, then faded. Outside, a truck passed down the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Texas life continued without ceremony. Inside, Jane picked up her phone again, not to check the balance this time, to open her camera. She held it at arm's length and studied her reflection on the screen. Hair pulled back casually, no makeup, tired eyes, but steady. She didn't record, not yet. She just observed, because sometimes the first step in transformation isn't action, it's acknowledgement. And acknowledgement begins with honesty. She wasn't angry at Alec. She wasn't plotting revenge. She wasn't even deeply upset. She was aware that partnership requires more than intention. Aware that motherhood was approaching fast. Aware that vulnerability deserves reinforcement. Her thumb hovered over the record button. She hesitated, then lowered the phone. Not tonight. Tonight was about processing, about grounding, about understanding the difference between independence and isolation. And if this moment feels familiar to you, if you've ever been left to hold strength alone, stay with me, because this story isn't about money. It's about evolution. The night before Alex left for Europe, the house felt unusually quiet, not tense, just careful. Dinner plates sat rinsed in the sink. The dishwasher hummed softly. Jane stood near the counter, folding a small stack of baby clothes. Someone had gifted them at a recent gathering. Alex leaned against the doorway, jacket draped over his arm, phone in hand. "I've triple-checked everything," he said. "Flights, meetings, transfers. You won't have to worry about anything." She nodded without looking up. "Okay." He stepped closer. "This deal matters, Jane. It positions us long-term." "Us." He said it confidently. She placed a folded onesie down gently. "I know it matters," she replied. "I'm not questioning that." He studied her face. "Then what's wrong?" She took a breath before answering. Not defensive, not dramatic. "Nothing's wrong. I just thought timing might matter too." He frowned slightly. "You're strong. You've always handled things." There it was again. Strong. She finally looked at him directly. "Strength ain't the same as support." The sentence didn't rise in volume. It settled. He hesitated, searching for the correct response. "I'll call every day." "I know." "I'll FaceTime during appointments." "I know." "I'm not disappearing." She nodded slowly. "I know." The conversation ended there. Not resolved, just paused. Morning came quickly. Airport traffic, early sunlight, a final hug near the drop-off lane. He kissed her forehead. "You'll be fine." She smiled faintly. He meant reassurance. She heard expectation. As he walked away, she rested her palm over her belly instinctively. The automatic doors closed behind him. That was the moment separation became real. Hours later, kitchen, banking app. $20.34. Not because he hadn't sent money. Not because he didn't care. Because systems delay. Because timing reveals cracks we don't anticipate. She stared at the screen longer this time. The number glowed quietly. $20.34. 7 months. Pregnant. Doctor's appointment next week. Gas tank at half. Groceries needed by Friday. The math wasn't catastrophic. It was symbolic. Symbols carry weight. She remembered his voice at the airport. "You'll be fine." She whispered the words back to herself softly. "I'll be fine." But something inside her adjusted. Not bitterness. Adjustment. Because when support feels distant, instinct activates. She walked toward the nursery and sat slowly in the unassembled rocking chair frame. Careful not to strain herself, the baby shifted again. "You and me," she murmured gently. "We don't panic." Her phone buzzed with a text. Alex. Landed. Heading to hotel. "You good?" She stared at the message. Her thumbs hovered. Then she typed. "Baby strong. I'm good." Short, accurate, controlled. He responded with a heart emoji. She locked her screen, placed the phone beside her, and exhaled, not defeated, focused. Because here's the part most people miss. The breaking point didn't come. There was no screaming, no accusations, no dramatic collapse. What came instead was clarity. Clarity that partnership requires alignment. Clarity that presence cannot be postponed indefinitely. Clarity that independence, when activated, changes dynamics quietly. She stood up carefully, walked back to the kitchen, and reopened her notes app. This time, she didn't hesitate. She began typing, not complaints, observations about pregnancy, about expectations placed on women to endure quietly, about the difference between being capable and being cared for. Her fingers moved steadily. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt intentional, and sometimes that shift is more powerful than confrontation. Pause the story for just a second, because if you've ever mistaken being capable for being supported, this story is for you. If you've ever been told you're strong, when what you actually needed was someone to sit beside you and say, "You don't have to carry this alone," this story is for you. And if you believe presence matters more than promises, I need you to do something right now. Hit the like button and subscribe to Mr. George Stories, because what you're about to witness isn't drama. It's transformation. Not loud, not messy, but powerful. Because this didn't become a revenge story. It became a recalibration story. And by the time Alex stepped back onto Texas soil, he wasn't walking back into the same emotional dynamic he left behind. Stay with me, because the real shock wasn't money. It was growth. 3 weeks later, Houston International Airport. Alex stepped off the plane, adjusting his cufflinks. Phone still in airplane mode. The trip had gone well. Meetings productive. Contracts promising. The kind of progress that normally energized him. He walked through the terminal confidently, blending into the steady rhythm of returning travelers. Then he turned his phone back on. It vibrated instantly. Once, twice, then continuously. Notifications stacked faster than he could process them. Mentions, tags, messages from colleagues, a link from someone in his investment circle. "Is this your wife?" His brows tightened slightly. He tapped the first notification. A local digital publication headline filled the screen below it. Jane, seated in their living room, radiant, confident, hand resting over her belly. He stopped walking. People moved around him. Suitcases rolled past. Announcements echoed faintly overhead. He didn't hear any of it. He scrolled. Another feature, another interview clip, another post with thousands of comments. He tapped a video. Jane's voice filled his headphones. Calm, grounded. "I used to think handling everything quietly made me strong," she said in the clip. "But real strength is knowing when growth is necessary." The comment section was alive. Women sharing their stories. Men admitting they were rethinking how they show up in relationships. Partners tagging each other. He swallowed. This wasn't small. This wasn't casual. This was momentum. He leaned against a pillar and watched the video all the way through. She wasn't attacking him. She wasn't exposing private arguments. She was teaching, measured, intentional, focused. His chest tightened slightly. Not from jealousy, from realization. He whispered under his breath without meaning to. "I didn't know." He hadn't known the platform was growing like this. He hadn't known articles were circulating. He hadn't known her voice was reaching beyond their living room. And that's when the deeper truth settled in. He hadn't asked. He had been busy building numbers. She had been building influence. He thought leaving meant sacrificing time for money. He didn't realize it had shifted emotional gravity, because while he was overseas securing contracts, Jane was securing clarity, and clarity changes everything. Hard cut. Airports are strange places. They hold reunions. They hold expectations. They hold people who believe things will feel the same once they walk back through their front doors. Alex stood there longer than he realized, phone still in his hand, Jane's voice echoing softly through his earbuds. He thought he understood the woman he married. He thought he understood strength, but he had only understood one version of it, and what waited at home wasn't confrontation. It was evolution. Because here's the truth. $20 didn't transform Jane. It revealed her. And to understand why that number didn't shake her, you have to understand who she was long before she ever met Alex, before the country clubs, before the investment meetings, before the airport goodbyes. There was Texas, wide skies stretching without apology, heat that demanded resilience, neighborhoods where laughter spilled from open windows on Sunday afternoons and music wasn't background noise. It was rhythm for survival. Jane was built from that heat, not just the sun, but the kind that comes from being raised by women who didn't fold under pressure, the kind that comes from watching groceries stretch further than logic suggested they could, the kind that comes from learning early that independence isn't rebellion, it's preparation. She wasn't fragile when Alex left. She wasn't confused. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was observing. And women who observe carefully rarely break suddenly. So before we return to that airport, before we step back into that house, before we witness the moment Alex truly understood what had shifted, let's go back. Back to where Jane learned that strength isn't loud. It's steady. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Now, let's begin at the beginning. Fade into. Airports hold moments that divide versions of people. Alex felt that division the second his phone reconnected to American service. The aircraft door had barely opened before passengers stood, impatient and cramped. He remained seated, composed, reviewing the mental checklist that had defined his entire adult life. Contracts secure, investors aligned, meetings productive. He had done what he believed was necessary. When he stepped into the terminal at Houston International Airport, he adjusted his jacket sleeve and powered his phone on. It vibrated almost immediately. Notifications stacked across the screen faster than he could process them. Mentions, tags, direct messages. A link from a colleague that simply read, "Is this Jane?" He slowed his stride, tapped the first alert. A digital publication filled his screen. Below the headline was Jane, seated in their living room, hand resting over her stomach, expression steady, confident. He stopped walking entirely. People passed him on both sides, luggage wheels echoing across polished floors. He didn't notice. He scrolled. Another feature, another interview, clips of her speaking calmly into a camera. He tapped a video. Jane's voice flowed through his earbuds. "I used to think handling everything quietly made me strong," she said. "But growth sometimes begins when you realize you deserve more than survival." The comments were alive. Women thanking her, men acknowledging lessons, partners reflecting. Alex swallowed slowly. He had known she was recording something small. He had not known it had expanded. He had not asked. A realization settled with quiet weight. 3 weeks earlier, he had boarded a flight, believing he was protecting their future. 3 weeks earlier, Jane had stood in their kitchen, staring at her banking app. $20.34 available. The rest pending. Not a failure, not abandonment, just timing. But timing reveals priorities. Back in that kitchen, she had refreshed the screen once, then placed her phone down deliberately. 7 months pregnant, heat pressing against the window, the nursery upstairs unfinished. That number had not frightened her. It had clarified something. Meanwhile, at that airport weeks later, Alex leaned against a pillar and replayed her video again. He thought leaving meant temporary distance. He did not anticipate transformation. "Let me ask you something. is providing the same as being present. If the bills are covered but the chair beside someone is empty, is that stability? If you have ever been told you are strong, while silently wishing someone would insist on sharing the weight, you understand this moment. And if you believe partnership means more than transfers and travel confirmations, I need you to engage with this story right now. Like this video, subscribe to Mr. George Stories, because what you are about to witness is not chaos. It is evolution. Now, to understand why $20 did not break Jane, you have to go back before the airport, before the platform, before the Europe trip, back to Texas, because Texas does not raise fragile women. Texas raises women who know how to stretch heat into endurance. Jane was 28 and built from that heat. Her childhood unfolded in a neighborhood where Sunday afternoons carried music through open windows and conversations traveled from porch to porch without invitation. Her mother believed in two things: keep your word, stand tall. Jane learned early that confidence was not volume, it was posture. At church, she watched women walk in wearing hats angled like crowns, backs straight, laughter unfiltered. At home, she learned how to read a room quickly. Who was genuine? Who was posturing? Who needed encouragement? Who needed boundaries? She became observant before she became outspoken. That skill would matter later. Her neighborhood did not operate on wealth. It operated on presence. People showed up for cookouts, for hospital visits, for graduations, for heartbreak. Community was not optional. It was oxygen. Jane absorbed that rhythm naturally. She laughed loudly. She debated confidently. She listened carefully. By the time she entered adulthood, she understood something clearly. Love without consistency becomes confusion. So when she met Alex years later, she noticed immediately that he moved differently. He was controlled, measured, strategic. At first, that steadiness felt secure. He listened when she spoke. He asked thoughtful questions. He remembered details. But even in those early days, there were differences in wiring. Jane valued presence instinctively. Alex valued structure instinctively. Neither was wrong. They were simply built from different environments. That difference would eventually matter, but not yet. For now, Texas was still shaping Jane into someone who did not panic when numbers looked small, because she had grown up watching women turn limited resources into abundance through discipline and community. So when she saw 34 cents available that afternoon weeks earlier, she did not collapse. She recalibrated. And at that airport, staring at articles about her expanding influence, Alex began to understand that recalibration. He whispered under his breath, "I didn't know." No anger, no jealousy, just realization. The woman he left was capable. The woman he returned to was evolving. And this story does not begin with a bank balance. It begins with the soil that raised her. Texas heat, Sunday laughter, strength that did not announce itself loudly. Because sometimes the most powerful shifts start long before anyone notices. And to see where this shift truly began, we go deeper. Texas heat does not ask permission before it settles into your skin. Jane grew up understanding that. On her block, Saturday mornings began with screen doors slamming, and someone already playing old-school R&B before noon. The air carried the scent of charcoal long before the grill was officially lit. Folding chairs appeared in driveways without announcement. Conversations overlapped without apology. Community wasn't scheduled, it unfolded. At 12 years old, Jane had already mastered observation. She could tell which neighbor needed encouragement, just by how slowly they walked to their mailbox. She knew which aunties preferred quiet respect, and which preferred loud humor. She learned to read tone, posture, and pauses long before she fully understood business language or corporate etiquette. That skill shaped her. One Sunday afternoon, years before Alex would ever enter her life, she stood near a grill while her uncle turned ribs carefully over open flame. Music played from a backyard speaker. Women laughed loudly near the folding tables stacked with aluminum trays of greens and cornbread. "Baby," her mother said casually while adjusting her church hat, "never let somebody tell you being strong means being silent." Jane looked up from the lemonade pitcher she was refilling. "What'd it mean then?" she asked. "It mean you know who you are, and you don't shrink that for nobody." That sentence rooted itself deeply. Shrinking was not allowed. Confidence did not require arrogance. It required grounding. Jane carried that grounding into every room she entered growing up. In school, she spoke up when teachers misinterpreted her tone. She learned how to assert herself without hostility. She developed humor as both shield and bridge. By the time she reached adulthood, her presence filled space naturally, not aggressively, but fully. That fullness is what startled Alex the first time he encountered her years later. But before we get there, understand this. Jane's upbringing did not revolve around luxury. It revolved around showing up. If someone was sick, food arrived without request. If someone graduated, the entire block celebrated. If someone struggled financially, no one announced it publicly, but help quietly appeared. That rhythm shaped her expectations of partnership. Presence meant participation. Support meant visibility. Money mattered, but attendance mattered more. Fast forward years later to the first cookout Alex attended after they began dating. He stepped out of his polished sedan wearing loafers clearly not designed for uneven grass. Jane noticed immediately. "You brave," she teased, eyes scanning his shoes. He glanced down. "I assumed this was outdoor casual." She laughed. "This survival casual." Music pulsed through the yard. Smoke drifted upward from the grill. Children ran across the lawn with sticky fingers, and no supervision beyond collective community awareness. Alex stood carefully near the patio table, posture straight, plate balanced cautiously in his hand. A cousin loaded his plate generously without asking for confirmation. "I'm good," Alex tried politely. "You ain't good yet," came the response. Jane covered her smile. He took a careful bite of a rib and blinked at the heat level. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I underestimated this environment," he admitted. She leaned closer. "It's not an environment. It's culture." He nodded slowly, absorbing the rhythm around him. Laughter came loudly here. Teasing signaled acceptance. Stories layered on top of each other. Alex did not fully belong yet, but he tried, and Jane noticed that too. Effort mattered to her more than polish. Later that evening, as the sun dipped lower and music softened slightly, Alex sat beside her on a folding chair. "Your world is vivid," he said carefully. She raised an eyebrow. "Vivid good or vivid overwhelming?" "Vivid, real." She studied him for a moment. "That's because it's not curated," she replied. "It just is." That statement lingered with him longer than he expected, because Alex's world had always been curated, measured, structured, predictable. His childhood looked different. Golf lessons instead of backyard basketball. Boarding school dorms instead of shared neighborhood sidewalks. Business dinners instead of folding tables under open sky. He grew up where emotions were managed quietly. Achievement was expected. Control was respected. And vulnerability was minimized. His father had once told him during a business seminar, "Never let feelings interrupt strategy." That philosophy followed him into adulthood. It shaped how he approached decisions. It shaped how he viewed responsibility. When Alex invited Jane to a country club dinner months later, the contrast reversed. Crisp white linens, soft classical music, conversations about portfolios and international markets. Jane wore a simple dress and carried herself confidently. Eyes lingered, not maliciously, just curiously. She noticed she did not shrink. When a guest asked what she did professionally, her answer was steady and precise. She spoke intelligently about marketing strategy and audience psychology. She pivoted seamlessly into a humorous observation about how wealthy men favored the same shades of blue suits. Alex nearly choked on his water. "Y'all got a uniform?" she asked lightly. A few guests laughed nervously. Alex laughed fully. She did not adjust her tone to match the room. She remained herself. That steadiness fascinated him. She navigated both worlds without apology. But beneath the surface, their wiring remained different. Jane instinctively valued visible presence. Alex instinctively valued structural provision. Neither noticed the tension forming quietly between those instincts. Not yet, because at that stage attraction softened edges. Shared playlists filled late nights. Long conversations stretched past midnight. Debates about politics, music, and food preferences strengthened connection. Jane admired his discipline. Alex admired her warmth. But seeds planted in upbringing always grow eventually. Jane expected partnership to mean standing beside each other visibly. Alex believed partnership meant building protection through resources. Both definitions felt valid until timing tested them, and that test would begin with a plane ticket to Europe. But before that ticket was booked, before pregnancy changed rhythm, their worlds continued blending cautiously, learning each other, adapting gradually, neither realizing how differently they interpreted the word security. That difference would not explode. It would reveal itself slowly. And when it did, both would have to choose growth over comfort. Houston had a way of blending ambition and personality into the same room. The networking event where Jane and Alex officially met wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was fluorescent lighting, name tags, catered appetizers, and professionals pretending not to size each other up within the first 30 seconds. Jane had almost not attended. She stood near the refreshment table, reviewing a mental checklist about a client presentation scheduled for the following week. She wore a tailored blazer over a simple blouse, posture relaxed but alert. Alex had almost not attended either. He had been convinced by a colleague that visibility matters, and he respected visibility. When he approached her, it was not because she stood out loudly. It was because she looked unbothered. While others laughed a little too hard or spoke a little too quickly, Jane moved through conversations at her own pace. She listened fully before responding. She asked questions that shifted discussions deeper than surface introductions. Alex admired efficiency. Jane demonstrated clarity. He extended his hand. Alex. She shook it once, firmly. Jane. There was no widened expression when he mentioned property investments, no subtle change in tone when he referenced international clients. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do wealthy men always wear the same 2 shades of blue?" He blinked. "I'm sorry? Y'all got a uniform or something?" For a split second, he didn't know how to respond. Then he laughed. Not a polite, social laugh, a genuine one. "I'll take that as feedback," he replied. She smiled lightly. "Just an observation." That exchange disrupted the usual hierarchy he navigated effortlessly. She was not impressed. She was curious. They spoke for 20 minutes that night, then 40, about branding, about cultural perception, about how wealth changes communication patterns, about how authenticity sells more than status. When the event ended, he asked if he could take her to dinner. She paused, just long enough to let him feel the space. "Dinner," she repeated, "but somewhere with actual flavor." He nodded. Challenge accepted. Their first date was not at a steakhouse with polished cutlery. Jane insisted on a food truck festival downtown. Music pulsed from speakers. Strings of lights hung across temporary booths. The smell of grilled corn and spiced meats blended with warm air. Alex stepped carefully over uneven pavement. "This was your idea," he reminded her. She grinned. "You wanted flavor." They sat on a low bench, sharing street tacos. Sauce dripped onto his cuff. Jane noticed immediately. "You ain't built for this, huh?" "I'm adaptable," he replied. She laughed. "I see that." They debated music tastes between bites. He preferred structured jazz. She leaned toward R&B with layered vocals. He admitted he overanalyzed everything before making decisions. She admitted she made some decisions instinctively and trusted her read of people. "Doesn't that ever backfire?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "But instincts sharpen when you actually use them." He studied her more carefully then. Jane did not speak impulsively. She spoke deliberately. That steadiness intrigued him. Over the next few months, their connection grew steadily, not rushed, not performative. He learned the rhythm of her laughter. She learned how he processed silence before responding. They introduced each other to their worlds gradually. The cookout had already tested him. Now it was her turn. When Alex invited Jane to a formal dinner at his country club, she prepared without overthinking it. The entrance was tall marble floors gleaming under soft lighting. Conversations hummed politely across linen-covered tables. Jane adjusted her posture slightly. Not smaller, just aligned. Eyes lingered. She noticed she did not alter her voice. When asked about her professional background, she answered precisely. When someone referenced international travel as a marker of sophistication, she replied lightly. Cultural depth doesn't require a passport stamp. A brief silence followed. Then Alex laughed, genuinely, Others joined carefully. Later that evening, as they walked toward the parking lot, Alex exhaled slowly. "You don't adjust yourself," he said. She glanced at him. "Why would I?" He considered that. In his world, adaptation often meant softening edges. Jane sharpened hers when necessary. It challenged him. He liked being challenged. Months passed. Their routines intertwined. Late-night conversations stretched past midnight. Shared playlists filled the background, while they debated everything from barbecue technique to investment ethics. Jane admired that Alex listened fully before speaking. Alex admired that Jane spoke with confidence, without hostility. The attraction matured into commitment. When he proposed, it was controlled, private, intentional. No crowd, no spectacle. Just the two of them on her porch under a warm Texas evening sky. "Are you sure?" she asked, half teasing. "I don't operate without certainty," he replied. She smiled. "That might be your first flaw." He laughed. She said yes. Marriage blended their worlds further. Jane navigated his structured environment smoothly. Alex continued learning hers. Neither realized that underlying differences in how they defined security would matter later. At that point, they were aligned in affection, aligned in attraction, aligned in ambition. The pregnancy was not planned, but when Jane sat on the edge of the bathtub staring at the test, hands trembling slightly, she did not panic. She calculated. Then she smiled softly. Life had shifted. When she told Alex that evening, he froze. Not long, just enough to register adjustment. "Sooner than I expected," he admitted quietly. She watched his face carefully. Not offended, observant. "Sooner ain't the same as wrong," she replied. He nodded slowly. Then he embraced her. But the embrace felt structured, measured. She noticed. She always noticed. Pregnancy changed the rhythm of their days gradually. Doctor appointments, cravings, fatigue. Jane's body softened visibly. Her awareness sharpened invisibly. Alex remained supportive, attentive, but work pressures increased simultaneously. An investment opportunity in Europe surfaced at the same time Jane entered her third trimester. The timing would test definitions. But in that moment, standing in their kitchen weeks before the flight, Jane rested his hand over her stomach and smiled lightly. "Guess we leveling up faster than planned." He smiled back. "Yes, we are." Neither realized how differently they interpreted that statement. Leveling up, to Alex, meant expansion. Leveling up, to Jane, meant presence. That difference would surface soon, but for now, they stood together, unaware of how one plane ticket would reveal everything quietly. The pregnancy changed the temperature inside their home, not drastically, subtly. Jane's body shifted first. Her energy rose and dipped, unpredictably. Some mornings, she moved slowly, pausing halfway up the stairs to steady her breath. Other days she woke up determined, reorganizing kitchen cabinets with quiet focus. Alex noticed the physical changes. He did not immediately recognize the emotional recalibration happening alongside them. One evening, 2 weeks after the pregnancy reveal, they sat at the kitchen table reviewing a list of upcoming appointments. Jane circled the next prenatal checkup date. 7 months already, she said softly. Alex nodded while scrolling through his phone calendar. Time compresses when you're busy. She studied his face. Does it? He glanced up. You don't think so? It feels slower to me. How? Because I feel everything changing. He paused. He wasn't dismissive. He was calculating. That's normal, he said. We adjust. Jane leaned back in her chair. When you said sooner than expected, what exactly did you mean? The question wasn't accusatory. It was precise. Alex folded his hands together. I meant financially. I had timelines, certain benchmarks. This accelerates them. So it's about numbers? It's about structure, he replied carefully. I like planning, and babies don't. He gave a small smile. Babies don't check calendars. She didn't smile back immediately. I don't want this to feel like a disruption, she said. It's not. It sounded like one. He inhaled slowly. That's not what I meant. But it's what you felt. Silence settled. Not hostile. Heavy. Alex stood and walked to the sink, rinsing his glass, though it didn't need rinsing. I've spent my entire life building stability, he said without turning around. I measure risk before I move. This changes the equation. Jane rose slowly from her chair and joined him at the counter. It's not an equation. He turned then. It is for me. That was the first crack. Not loud, just honest. Jane absorbed that. Pregnancy wasn't a variable to her. It was a shift in identity. To Alex, it was a shift in trajectory. Neither interpretation was wrong, but they weren't aligned. Over the next week, Alex's phone rang more frequently. Late-night emails, conference calls that extended past dinner. Jane would sit on the couch, one hand resting over her stomach, listening to his measured voice from the study. Projected returns, strategic expansion, international positioning. One night, she entered the room quietly while he was mid-call. He held up a finger without looking at her. She nodded and backed away. Later, when he joined her in the living room, she asked casually, "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," he replied. "There's a serious opportunity developing." She waited. "Europe," he added. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "For how long?" "A few weeks." The room changed temperature. "You're serious?" "It's critical," he said. "This kind of access doesn't repeat." "I'm 7 months." "I know." She studied him. "You planning to take me?" "It's not practical." "Why?" "Travel stress, time zones, meetings all day, and being here alone ain't stress." He hesitated. "You won't be alone." She stared at him. He realized what he said. "I mean, I know what you meant," she interrupted softly. He stepped closer. "This secures us." She looked down briefly at her stomach, then back up. "Our future is already here." His jaw tightened slightly. "You think I don't understand that?" "I think you understand responsibility. And you think I don't understand presence?" "I think you prioritize differently." That landed not as accusation, as fact. The following evening, they ate dinner quietly, not distant, just careful. Jane broke the silence first. "When would you leave?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks, she repeated. "That gives us time to prepare." "For what?" "For logistics." She exhaled slowly. "You keep saying prepare, like this is a presentation." He pushed his plate back slightly. "It's my job to think ahead, and it's mine to carry this," she said gently, resting a hand on her stomach. He looked at her then. Really looked, noticing the fullness, the weight she adjusted constantly, the way she shifted when standing. Guilt flickered briefly across his expression. "I'll schedule daily calls," he said. "That's not the same." "Then tell me what is." She held his gaze. "Being here." He didn't answer immediately, because he couldn't. His world taught him that financial security prevented instability. Jane's world taught her that physical presence prevented isolation. Neither had yet crossed fully into the other's understanding, and in that gap, the shift nobody saw had already begun. The week before Alex's departure arrived faster than Jane expected. The house looked the same, felt different. Suitcases appeared in the hallway 2 days before his flight. One was already half-packed, folded shirts aligned with precision. His passport rested on the dresser. Printed itineraries lay beside it. Jane stood in the doorway, watching him organize his travel documents. "You always pack early?" she asked. "I don't like rushing," he replied without looking up. She nodded slowly. "I noticed." He zipped a smaller compartment and turned toward her. "I need this to go smoothly." "You need the trip to go smoothly," she corrected gently. He paused. That too. The correction didn't spark an argument. It simply lingered. Later that evening, they sat on the edge of their bed, reviewing hospital information packets. Jane flipped through pages slowly, occasionally marking questions with a pen. Alex checked flight confirmations on his phone. "Your appointment next Wednesday," he said, glancing at the calendar. "I'll FaceTime in." She looked up. "FaceTime in?" "Yes." "That's your solution?" "It's the best I can do from across the ocean." She closed the packet carefully. "You don't see how that sounds." He exhaled through his nose. "I'm not avoiding responsibility." "I didn't say you were, but that's what this feels like." "It feels like timing," she said calmly. "And timing don't always care about intention." Silence returned, soft, heavy. The night before his flight, the air felt thicker. Dinner plates sat untouched longer than usual. Neither of them had much appetite. Jane stood at the sink rinsing vegetables, while Alex leaned against the counter. "I'll transfer enough to cover everything," he said. "Groceries, appointments, extras." She didn't turn around. "I'm not worried about groceries." "What are you worried about?" She shut off the faucet and faced him. "Being alone when I shouldn't have to be." You're not alone. Her eyes held his steadily. Explain that. He struggled for a precise answer. You have support. That ain't the same as you. The words were not sharp. They were tired. He stepped closer. You know I wouldn't go if it wasn't important. That's the problem. What? You define important differently right now. That sentence stayed suspended between them. Neither raised their voice. Neither accused. But the emotional gap widened. Morning arrived with muted light filtering through the curtains. Jane woke first. She lay still for a moment, listening to Alex's breathing beside her. Her hand rested over her stomach instinctively. The baby shifted slightly. You good? She whispered. Alex stirred awake. Minutes later, they moved through the house quietly. Coffee brewed. Suitcases rolled toward the door. At the driveway, he set his luggage down and turned toward her. Call me for anything, he said. I will. He placed his hands gently on her shoulder. You'll be fine. There it was again. She offered a small smile. I always am. He kissed her forehead and walked toward the car. She watched until the vehicle disappeared at the end of the street. Only then did the quiet fully settle. Inside, she cleaned the kitchen slowly, not because it needed cleaning, because motion steadied thoughts. Her phone buzzed mid-morning. Bank notification. She wiped her hands and picked it up. Transfer received. She opened the app. Balance processing. Pending. Available. $20.34. She stared at the screen longer than necessary. The full amount showed below as incoming. Delayed. Processing. She blinked once. Refreshed. Same number. $20.34. She exhaled lightly. Not panic. Assessment. Gas tank. Half full. Fridge. Moderately stocked. Savings. Intact, but separate. She placed the phone down on the counter and leaned against it. 7 months pregnant. House quiet. Transfer delayed. Not catastrophic, but symbolic, because timing has a way of highlighting vulnerability. She walked toward the living room window and pulled the curtain slightly aside. Texas sun already high. Neighbors moving normally through their day. Life unchanged. Inside, her reality felt sharper, not unstable, just exposed. Her phone buzzed again. Alex, boarding now? Everything good? She looked at the message. Her thumb hovered. She typed. Transfer still processing. I'm good, he responded quickly. It'll clear soon. Let me know if anything comes up. She locked the screen, rested the phone on the table. The number lingered in her mind. $20 wasn't about survival. It was about symbolism. She moved toward the nursery and stood in the doorway. Crib unassembled. Paint dry, but waiting for final touches. She walked in slowly and lowered herself carefully onto the floor beside the crib box. Her hand traced the cardboard edge. Okay, she whispered softly. So this is where we at. The baby kicked lightly in response. She smiled faintly. All right. Her voice held calm, but something shifted inside her. Not anger, not resentment. Shift, because reliance had always been balanced in her world. Support visible, participation tangible. Now she saw clearly how easily presence can become optional when money is present. That clarity did not make her emotional. It made her strategic. She rose slowly and walked back to the kitchen, picked up her phone again, opened her notes app, typed one sentence. Strength without support becomes self-reliance. She stared at the words, then added another line, and self-reliance changes dynamics. She did not know yet what she would do with those thoughts, but the shift had begun. Before we continue, if you've ever experienced a moment where timing exposed more than intention, I want you to engage with this story, like the video. Comment presence if you understand that emotional availability cannot be delayed, and stay with Mr. George stories, because what happens next isn't loud, it's deliberate. Jane placed the phone down once more. $20.34. Processing. Temporary, but revealing. She walked to the refrigerator, opened it, and made a mental inventory, not of groceries, of independence. The following Wednesday arrived quietly. Jane woke before sunrise, not because of an alarm, but because sleep had grown lighter lately. Her body required adjustment every few hours. She shifted carefully onto her side and placed a hand beneath her stomach for support. Before sitting up, the house felt still. She checked her phone. No new banking alerts. The transfer had cleared the previous evening. The full amount now sat in her account. She noticed it. She did not react to it, because the moment that mattered had already passed. She dressed slowly in a loose cotton dress and flat sandals, tying her hair back without much thought. The mirror reflected a fuller version of herself. Her face looked softer, eyes slightly tired but steady. "You good?" She murmured toward her stomach again. A faint movement answered. She smiled. At the clinic, the waiting room hummed with low conversation. Couples sat side by side, some holding hands, others scrolling through their phones in comfortable silence. Jane checked in at the front desk. "Just you today?" the receptionist asked casually. "Yes, ma'am," Jane replied with a polite smile. She took a seat near the window. Across from her, a man adjusted a diaper bag while his partner leaned into his shoulder. To her left, another couple debated baby names in whispers. Jane folded her hands neatly over her stomach. Her phone buzzed. "Alex, about to head into a meeting. FaceTime during the appointment?" She stared at the message for a moment. The time difference meant it would be late afternoon for him in Europe. She typed back, "They just called my name." A second later, "Call if you can." She stood and followed the nurse down the hallway alone. Inside the dim ultrasound room, she lay back carefully while the technician applied gel across her stomach. 7 months now. The technician asked lightly. "Yes. Active, little one?" "Already opinionated," Jane replied. The screen flickered to life. A steady heartbeat filled the room. Jane's eyes fixed on the monitor. The technician pointed gently. "There's the movement." Jane swallowed slowly. In that moment, the room narrowed to sound and image. Life moving, responding, growing. Her phone vibrated lightly on the side table. FaceTime request from Alex. She glanced at it, then back at the screen. "Go ahead and answer if you'd like," the technician said. Jane hesitated, then shook her head softly. "It's okay." She wanted this moment uninterrupted, not divided by signal strength, not filtered through a screen. The heartbeat echoed steadily. Jane felt something anchor deeper inside her. Not fear, not loneliness, resolve. When the appointment ended, she walked back to her car slowly, sunlight warming the pavement beneath her feet. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed again. "Alex, how'd it go?" She typed. "Healthy. Strong." He responded almost instantly. "Good. Send pics if you can." She stared at the message, then typed, "I will." She placed the phone face down in the cup holder and drove home. Across the ocean, Alex sat at a long table inside a private meeting room overlooking a European city skyline. Crystal glasses, pressed suits, low voices discussing investment positioning. He remained focused. Numbers moved across projected slides, potential returns, acquisition timelines, expansion plans. His phone lay face down beside him. When the meeting paused briefly, he flipped it over. Jane's message. "Healthy. Strong." He nodded once, almost to himself. "Good." He turned the phone back over and returned to the conversation. Meanwhile, in Texas, Jane stepped inside the house and removed her sandals near the door. The air conditioner hummed steadily. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of cold water, and leaned against the counter. The ultrasound image sat on her phone screen now. She stared at it longer than before. Then she opened her camera. She positioned it carefully on the countertop, pressed record. For a few seconds, she didn't speak. Then, "Today I went to my appointment alone," she began calmly. "And I realized something." She paused. "I've always been told I'm strong. But sometimes strength becomes a habit instead of a choice." Her voice remained even. "I don't resent anyone. I don't feel abandoned. But I do feel aware." She rested a hand over her stomach. "Motherhood makes you evaluate everything differently." She stopped recording, watched the clip back. No dramatics, no accusation, just clarity. She didn't post it, not yet. Instead, she opened her laptop, created a new folder, labeled it simply Notes. Inside, she began typing observations about pregnancy, reflections on partnership, thoughts about independence. The words flowed naturally, not as complaint, as structure, because when emotion meets awareness, direction forms. That evening, Alex attended a formal dinner with investors. City lights stretched beyond tall windows. Conversation floated across the table with practiced control. One of the men across from him asked casually, "Family good?" Alex nodded. "Wife's expecting." "Congratulations," the man replied. "Must be motivating." "It is," Alex said, and he meant it. But motivation and participation are not identical. Back in Texas, Jane sat on the porch as sunset painted the sky in muted orange. She placed her laptop beside her and closed her eyes briefly. The neighborhood carried familiar sounds: distant laughter, a passing car, a dog barking. Comforting, grounded. She opened her eyes and picked up her phone, scrolled through social platforms, observed conversations, stories of women balancing careers and pregnancy, stories of navigating partnerships. She studied patterns, engagement, language, tone. Her marketing instincts activated naturally, not to compete, to contribute. She returned to her laptop and began outlining something intentional, a small digital space where women could speak honestly about motherhood and self-worth. No grand announcement, no spectacle, just voice. And voice grows when it's grounded. As night settled, her phone buzzed again. "Alex, dinner ran late. How you feeling?" She typed, thinking. "About?" She paused, then replied, "About growth." He stared at the message on his end for several seconds. "What kind?" he asked. She responded, "The kind you don't always see immediately." He read that twice, then set his phone down. Inside their home, Jane rested both hands over her stomach once more. "You and me," she whispered softly. The baby shifted gently beneath her palm. In that quiet moment, empowerment did not arrive loudly. It arrived steadily, because the shift nobody saw wasn't explosive. It was strategic, and it had only just begun. The days that followed moved with quiet rhythm. Jane did not wake up transformed. She woke up intentional. Each morning began the same way, hand over her stomach, listening to movement beneath her palm before her feet touched the floor. But something in her routine sharpened. Instead of scrolling aimlessly after breakfast, she opened her laptop. Instead of letting thoughts drift, she structured them. Her digital folder labeled notes expanded steadily. Reflections turned into outlines. Outlines turned into scripts. Scripts turned into short recordings. She did not post immediately. She refined. Growth, she believed, should be deliberate. One Thursday afternoon, she drove to the grocery store alone. The Texas sun pressed heavily against the windshield as she pulled into the parking lot. She adjusted her seat slowly before stepping out, one hand instinctively resting against her lower back. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Shopping carts clattered across tile. Jane moved through aisles methodically, not because she lacked money now, because awareness had sharpened her habits. She picked up a carton of eggs and flipped it gently to check for cracks. Fresh produce next. Ground turkey, whole grain bread. Her phone calculator opened as she added items mentally. Old habits from childhood surfaced automatically. Stretch what you have. Plan ahead. Don't waste. At the checkout line, a woman glanced at her stomach and smiled warmly. "When you do?" she asked casually. "Couple months," Jane replied. "You excited?" She paused briefly. Yes, that answer was honest. But excitement now carried structure. When the total flashed on the register screen, Jane nodded once. Budget respected. No anxiety, no excess. As she loaded groceries into her trunk, she reflected on something unexpected. The 20 on 34 cents moment had not scared her. It had clarified self-reliance, and clarity fuels action. Back home, she placed groceries away carefully, then returned to her laptop. She opened the camera application again. This time, she did not hesitate. She pressed record. "Hi," she began calmly. "I'm 7 months pregnant. And today, I want to talk about strength." Her voice carried steady warmth. "I've been called strong my entire life. And while I appreciate that, I've realized something. Strength shouldn't replace support." She paused, deliberately. Sometimes we become so capable that people forget we're also human. Her hand rested lightly over her stomach. "I'm learning that motherhood isn't just about preparing for a child. It's about preparing yourself." She ended the recording after 5 minutes, watched it back once. No dramatic music, no exaggerated tone, just honesty. She uploaded it. No announcement, no heavy caption, just a simple line, reflection. Then she closed her laptop. She did not refresh the page obsessively. She began assembling the crib upstairs instead. Slow movements, measured effort. By evening, her phone buzzed gently on the kitchen counter. One notification, then 3, then 10. She wiped her hands and checked. Comments, likes, messages. Women sharing similar experiences. One wrote, "I needed this today." Another, "Thank you for saying what we don't always say out loud." Jane read carefully, not overwhelmed, encouraged. The numbers were small, but engagement was sincere. She responded to a few comments thoughtfully, closed the app, returned to dinner preparation. Growth did not need spectacle. It needed consistency. Over the next week, she posted 2 more reflections. Short, grounded, focused on personal awareness during pregnancy. The response multiplied gradually. Her following grew from dozens to hundreds, then into the thousands. She studied analytics with professional precision. Engagement spikes, watch time, comments per minute. Her marketing background activated naturally. She refined her tone slightly, adjusted posting time, clarified her message structure. It wasn't about attention. It was about alignment. Meanwhile, in Europe, Alex remained immersed in negotiations. He checked his phone between meetings, but did not yet fully explore Jane's uploads. He saw notifications from her account occasionally. He assumed they were small posts. He had not asked for details. One Saturday afternoon in Texas, Jane attended a small neighborhood gathering. Nothing elaborate, just folding chairs and lemonade under shade. Someone mentioned seeing her video online. "You that girl talking about motherhood?" A neighbor asked. Jane smiled lightly. "I guess it's good," the neighbor added. "Real." Jane nodded once. Appreciate that. She did not inflate the moment. She absorbed it, because validation, when grounded, becomes fuel, not ego. That evening, she sat alone on the porch again, laptop balanced carefully on her knees, sunset stretching orange across the horizon. She opened a blank document and typed a heading, Platform Vision. Underneath, she wrote, "Honest conversations about motherhood, emotional accountability in relationships, cultural resilience, financial awareness, without fear." She stared at the list, then added one more line, "Build stability beyond circumstance." The baby kicked gently beneath her palm. "You see that?" she murmured softly. This wasn't rebellion. It wasn't defiance. It was preparation. And preparation, when quiet, looks like rebirth. Not loud, not explosive, but steady. The 20, 30, 34 cents moment had not diminished her. It had refined her. And refinement changes posture, not visibly at first, but undeniably. By the end of that week, her videos reached 5,000 views collectively. Small partnerships began to trickle into her direct messages. Nothing finalized yet, but inquiries, interest, recognition. Jane closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. Her reflection in the darkened screen looked different, not because she had changed overnight, but because direction replaces uncertainty, and direction creates momentum. Momentum rarely announces itself loudly. It accumulates. By the second week after her first upload, Jane's platform no longer felt experimental. It felt intentional. Her following crossed 10,000. Engagement remained strong. Comments were no longer just appreciation. They were conversation. Women shared personal stories beneath her posts. Some described feeling unseen during pregnancy. Others admitted they had confused independence with isolation for years. Jane read every message carefully. She responded selectively, not to maintain numbers, to maintain tone. Her mornings shifted again. Breakfast, check analytics, outline next reflection, film, edit, upload. The process became rhythmic, not obsessive, structured. One afternoon, an email notification appeared in her inbox. Subject line, collaboration inquiry. She opened it. A maternity clothing brand based in Texas had discovered her content. They wanted to send pieces for her to style during pregnancy. Compensation included a small payment per post. Jane read the email twice. Then she smiled faintly, not because of the amount, because of the alignment. She drafted a response professionally, requested details, negotiated terms calmly. Her marketing education surfaced seamlessly. By the end of the week, The first payment arrived, modest but real. She deposited it into her account, not into the shared household category, into her personal balance. A quiet separation, not secret, not hidden, structured. More inquiries followed. A prenatal wellness app, a small home decor company focused on nursery design, a podcast invitation. Each one validated something deeper than exposure. Her voice carried weight. Across the ocean, Alex sat in his hotel suite reviewing financial summaries after a long meeting. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and hotel detergent. Outside, city lights shimmered against evening sky. He logged into a shared account to confirm expense reports. That's when he noticed it. Small deposits, recurring. He frowned slightly. The amounts weren't large, but they were consistent. He clicked into transaction details, descriptions tied to brand partnerships. He leaned back slowly in the leather chair. Jane had mentioned she was recording. She had not mentioned revenue. He opened her social profile, scrolled. The follower count startled him. He tapped her latest video. She appeared seated in their living room, wearing a simple maternity dress from the brand that had emailed her earlier. "I'm learning that growth doesn't always come from confrontation," she said calmly. "Sometimes it comes from clarity." He watched the full 5 minutes without skipping. The comments section overflowed beneath. He scrolled through them carefully. Support, admiration, reflection. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, in realization. She wasn't waiting. She was building. He replayed the first video she had uploaded weeks earlier, the one recorded after her ultrasound appointment. He noticed something he had missed the first time. Her tone, measured, resolved. He set the phone down slowly. A subtle discomfort surfaced, not because she was succeeding, because he had not asked enough questions to know how far she had progressed. He picked up the phone again and called her. The time difference meant it was late evening in Texas. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. "I saw the deposits," he began. She paused briefly. "Oh, you didn't tell me. You didn't ask," she replied evenly. The sentence landed without hostility. He rubbed his temple lightly. "I didn't realize it grew like this." "It's growing," she corrected. "How long?" "Couple weeks. And you didn't think to mention it?" "I figured you were busy." There was no accusation in her voice. That unsettled him more. "I'm not too busy for that," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, but the response carried space inside it. He leaned forward in the chair. "How are you feeling?" "Focused." That answer lingered. Not emotional, not fragile. Focused. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "That's good," he said. "Is it?" she asked lightly. "Yes." She let the silence sit, then changed subject. "How's Europe?" "Productive." "That's good." The call ended shortly after. Neither upset, neither reassured, just aware. Later that night, Alex remained seated long after the call ended. He opened his laptop, but didn't immediately return to spreadsheets. Instead, he replayed her latest video again. She spoke about preparing for motherhood while maintaining self-respect. He noticed how confidently she carried herself, how the camera angle was steady, how her words were structured. She wasn't improvising. She was building a message. He leaned back and exhaled slowly. Providing had always been his language of love. Now he wondered if it was incomplete. He checked the account again. More small deposits. Regular. He calculated projections unconsciously. If her growth continued at this pace, the income would scale. Not dramatically yet, but steadily. The realization shifted something subtle. She was no longer only supported. She was contributing. Not because she needed to, because she chose to. That distinction mattered. Back in Texas, Jane sat at her kitchen table reviewing brand agreements carefully. The house felt different now, not emptier. Activated, her phone buzzed again. Another collaboration inquiry. She smiled briefly and typed a professional response. Then she paused, opened her banking app, scrolled through the small deposits. She created a new category within her personal account. Label, security. She didn't transfer funds yet. She simply created the space. Structure begins with naming. Before we continue, if you've ever reached a moment where growth forced you to reassess your dynamic, engage with this story, like this video, and stay with Mr. George Stories, because what's coming next will not explode. It will recalibrate. That night, Jane closed her laptop and stepped onto the porch once more. Texas air, warm against her skin. The baby shifted gently. "You see how we're building?" she murmured softly. This wasn't about proving Alex wrong. It was about not depending entirely on anyone's timing and independence. When quiet reshapes partnerships without argument. Across the ocean, Alex stared at the city lights through his hotel window. He had secured deals, closed negotiations, expanded portfolios, but something felt slightly off balance. Not failing, not collapsing, just shifting. He checked his return flight confirmation. 2 weeks remaining, plenty of time. Or so he thought. The final week of Alex's trip arrived with intensity. Meetings stretched longer. Negotiations tightened. The deal on the table was larger than the others. A multi-property expansion across 2 European cities. It required commitment, capital, and confidence. Alex thrived in rooms like this. He spoke calmly. He projected certainty. He calculated downside risk without visible hesitation. Across the polished conference table, investors nodded as he outlined projected growth over 5 years. We're not just expanding, he said. We're positioning long-term. Positioning long-term security. The words rolled off his tongue effortlessly, but as he spoke them, an image interrupted his focus briefly. Jane, seated at their kitchen table, laptop open, hand resting on her stomach, calm. He finished the presentation cleanly. Applause followed. Contracts moved forward. Later that evening, alone in his hotel room, he poured himself a glass of water and loosened his tie. The deal was secured. Financially, the trip had succeeded. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, he felt reflective. He opened his phone and scrolled through Jane's profile again. Her most recent upload had crossed 50,000 views. Brand partnerships were tagged openly now. Her audience had grown beyond local reach. She had done this quietly, without announcement, without fanfare. He played the newest video. I've realized something, Jane said on screen. Security isn't just about income. It's about alignment. He paused the video. Alignment. He leaned back against the headboard. Providing had always been his strategy for love. Show up financially. Build structure. Eliminate risk. But structure without proximity creates distance. He hadn't abandoned her. He had prioritized differently. And the difference mattered. For the first time, he considered something uncomfortable. If she no longer depended fully on his provision, what defined his role? The question unsettled him, not because he feared irrelevance, because he feared misunderstanding. He had believed he was strengthening their foundation. She had been strengthening herself. Neither was wrong, but neither had fully communicated the gap. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then opened their shared account once more. More deposits, more consistent. Her contribution, while smaller in scale, represented autonomy. He respected autonomy. He simply hadn't expected it to accelerate this quickly. Back in Texas, Jane finalized her first major partnership contract. The maternity brand increased their offer after her engagement rate surpassed projections. She reviewed the updated terms carefully, then signed electronically. Payment scheduled. She opened her banking app once more. This time, she transferred a portion of her earnings into the new category she had created. Security. The transfer completed instantly. She stared at the confirmation for a second. Not emotional. Grounded. This wasn't secrecy. Alex could see every transaction if he checked. This was structure, preparedness, a shift in internal posture, not visible from the outside, but felt. She closed the app and walked toward the nursery. The crib, now assembled fully. Soft, neutral bedding tucked neatly. Books stacked along the small shelf beside the rocking chair. She ran her fingers lightly along the wood frame. I got you, she murmured softly. It wasn't defiance. It was reassurance. 2 days later, Alex sat in the final signing meeting. Contracts exchanged, hands shaken, commitments confirmed. Congratulations, one of the investors said. You're expanding at the right time. Alex nodded politely. Timing. He thought about the word differently now. He excused himself early and stepped outside into the cool European evening air. He called Jane. She answered after 3 rings. Hey, it's done, he said. The deal? Yes. Congratulations. Her voice carried sincerity. Thank you. A pause. How are you? He asked. Busy. With? Building. The word landed differently this time. He swallowed lightly. I see that. You do. I've been watching. She smiled faintly on her end. That's good. He hesitated. Jane. When I left, I thought I was protecting us. I know. But I think I missed something. What? Presence isn't replaceable. Silence settled briefly. She didn't rush to respond. You learning? She asked gently. Yes. There was no accusation in her tone, only evaluation. I'm glad, she said finally. He looked down at the sidewalk beneath his feet. I come home next week. I know. Her voice was steady, not eager, not distant, just aware. That evening, Jane opened her laptop once more. Analytics showed exponential growth. Messages from women across multiple states. Podcast invitations. Guest features. Speaking opportunities. She closed the laptop slowly. Walked to the kitchen. Opened her banking app again. Transferred another portion into security. The balance grew. Not enormous, but stable. Her posture straightened subtly as she exhaled. This was not about escaping. It was about balance. The subtle shift in power did not make her aggressive. It made her calm. Independence reduces anxiety, and reduced anxiety creates clarity. The next morning in Europe, Alex packed his suitcase, carefully, methodically, but his thoughts were less rigid now. He no longer measured success solely in contracts. He measured it in proximity. He checked his flight confirmation again. Departure tomorrow morning. Arrival Houston. He imagined walking through their front door, imagined seeing her in person. After weeks apart, he expected warmth, but he also sensed change, not distance, evolution. The woman he left had been strong. The woman he was returning to had direction, and direction shifts dynamic quietly. At the airport the following day, he powered off his phone before boarding. As the plane lifted off European soil, he stared out the window. He had secured international expansion, but the real recalibration awaited him back home. He didn't know exactly what he would face. He only knew this. Providing alone was no longer enough, and for the first time he was ready to understand why. The plane moved steadily across the sky, toward Texas, toward Jane, toward a version of partnership neither of them had fully defined yet. The plane touched down in Houston just after midday. Alex remained seated until the aisle cleared. He preferred order over urgency. Overhead compartments opened. Passengers reached for luggage impatiently. He waited. When he finally stepped into the terminal, Texas air felt warmer than Europe's crisp chill, familiar, grounded. He adjusted his jacket sleeve and reached into his pocket. Phone still in airplane mode. He paused before turning it on, then pressed the button. Signal returned. The vibration started immediately, once, twice, then continuously. Notifications stacked across the screen faster than he could process them. Mentions, tags, direct messages, news alerts. His brow tightened slightly. He tapped the first notification. A local Houston digital magazine headline filled his screen. Jane's face appeared below it. Professional photo. Hand resting on her belly. Eyes steady. He blinked. Scrolled. Another headline. Another notification. Podcast feature. Interview request. Brand collaboration announcement. Tagged publicly. He stopped walking. Travelers moved around him. Suitcases rolled past. Airport announcements echoed overhead. He didn't move. He opened social media. Follower count had multiplied again. Hundreds of thousands. Verified checkmark, pending. He tapped her most recent video. Jane sat in their living room, speaking calmly. I've learned that security is something you build internally first, she said. External support matters, but internal stability changes everything. The comments scrolled rapidly. Women thanking her. Men reflecting. Couples debating. He swallowed. He hadn't realized scale. He hadn't realized momentum. He hadn't realized she had crossed beyond local influence. Another notification popped up. An email from a business contact. Didn't know your wife was leading this conversation. Impressive. He leaned back against a pillar in the middle of the terminal. Watched another video, then another. The view counts stunned him. This wasn't gradual growth. It had accelerated. A second wave of notifications hit. Tags from national outlets. Brand campaigns announcing official partnerships. A maternity campaign featuring Jane's image across multiple posts. He zoomed in on one. Professional lighting. Editorial styling. Confidence radiating. He exhaled slowly. The shock wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was recalibration. He replayed one clip where she said, "Growth doesn't ask permission." He paused it mid-sentence. The terminal noise faded into background hum. 3 weeks? In 3 weeks, She had built something significant, without announcing it, without asking for validation, without waiting. He thought about the night he left. You'll be fine. She had been more than fine. He checked his banking app reflexively. More deposits, larger now, consistent, structured. He realized something uncomfortable. She hadn't needed rescue. She had needed respect, and respect requires presence. He straightened slightly and walked toward baggage claim. But his pace had changed, measured, reflective. He wasn't returning to the same emotional landscape. He opened her earliest upload again, the one recorded after her ultrasound appointment. Her tone had shifted even then. He just hadn't recognized it. He whispered under his breath, almost involuntarily, "I didn't know." And that was the second climax. Not a confrontation, a realization. He had secured international expansion. She had secured independence. The difference altered everything. As he collected his suitcase from the carousel, another notification appeared. A major Texas-based publication requesting an in-person feature interview. He stared at the screen. This wasn't temporary momentum. It was positioning. He remembered telling investors days earlier, "We're positioning long-term." She had been doing the same, just differently. He exited the terminal doors into warm Houston air. Sunlight, brighter than expected. Car horns, traffic. Life unchanged outside. Inside him, something had shifted. He typed a quick message. "Landing now." She replied almost instantly. "Drive safe." No extra punctuation. No dramatic welcome. Just steady. He slid into the driver's seat of his car and sat there for a moment before turning the ignition. He looked at his phone again. Scrolled through headlines, scrolled through comments, scrolled through photos. The woman he left had been observant. The woman he was returning to was influential. And influence changes dynamics. Quietly, he pulled out of the parking garage and merged onto the highway. Houston's skyline rising ahead. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't defensive. But he understood this clearly. The house he was driving toward contained more than a pregnant wife. It contained evolution, and he had almost missed it. Traffic moved steadily along the Houston freeway. Alex drove without turning on the radio. His mind replayed headlines and video clips in silence. He wasn't preparing an argument. He was recalculating understanding. When he pulled into their driveway, the house looked exactly the same. White exterior, neatly trimmed lawn, front porch, catching late afternoon light. Normal? He stepped out of the car slowly, suitcase in hand. Before ringing the doorbell, he paused briefly, not out of hesitation, out of awareness. Then he opened the door with his key. Inside, the house smelled faintly of clean linen and something sweet. Maybe the candle Jane liked in the evenings. He set his suitcase near the wall quietly. The sound of laptop keys tapping came from the kitchen. He walked toward it. Jane sat on a tall stool, laptop open, one hand resting lightly beneath her stomach, while the other moved across the keyboard. Her hair was pulled back. She wore a soft maternity dress from one of the brands he'd seen online. She looked up when she sensed movement. Their eyes met. "Hey," she said calmly, not rushing toward him, not distant, present. He nodded once. "Hey." He took a few steps closer. "You didn't come to the airport," he said gently. "You told me not to overexert," she replied lightly. "Traffic ain't worth it." "Fair." He studied her for a moment. "You've been busy." "Yes, that's obvious." A faint smile touched her lips. "You saw?" "I saw." She closed her laptop slowly. Silence sat between them. Not sharp, measured. "I didn't know it had grown like that," he said. "It's still growing." "That wasn't small, Jane." "I didn't plan for small." He exhaled through his nose softly. "I should have asked more." "Yes." The agreement wasn't harsh. It was direct. He glanced toward the hallway. "Nursery finished?" "Yes." He walked slowly down the hallway toward the room. The door stood open. Inside, the crib assembled neatly. Books stacked along the shelf. Soft lighting installed above the rocking chair. Nothing extravagant. Everything intentional. He stepped inside fully, ran his hand along the crib rail. "You did all this?" She appeared in the doorway behind him. "We did," she corrected calmly. "You sent money." The correction carried weight, not accusation. Fact. He turned toward her. "You built this?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think you were building something that large." She tilted her head slightly. "What did you think I was doing?" "Waiting." The word hung heavy. She didn't react defensively. "I wasn't waiting," she said evenly. "I was growing." The room felt smaller, not because of tension, because truth compresses space. He stepped closer. I thought securing contracts meant securing us. Security ain't just contracts. He absorbed that quietly. I see that now. She studied his face. Do you? Yes. Her gaze softened slightly. I never doubted your intention, she said. But intention without presence feels incomplete. I thought FaceTime counted. It doesn't. There was no volume increase, no dramatic movement, just maturity. He looked down briefly at her stomach, the fullness more noticeable in person. I missed appointments, he said quietly. Yes, I shouldn't have. She nodded once. That's all I wanted. An apology? An acknowledgement. He inhaled slowly. You deserved that. Another pause. The baby shifted visibly beneath her dress. His eyes followed the movement instinctively. He stepped forward and placed his hand gently over her stomach. The baby kicked in response. He swallowed. I don't want to miss anything else. She didn't rush to reassure him. Then don't, she replied simply. They moved back into the kitchen together. He set his jacket over a chair. She reopened her laptop briefly, then closed it again. I can finish that later, she said. No, it's okay, he replied. I interrupted. You're home, she said. That word carried more meaning than usual. Home. He leaned against the counter. How far does it reach now? He asked. Nationwide, she answered. And you did that in 3 weeks. I had the clarity before you left, she said quietly. I just needed the focus. He processed that. The $20. He began. She raised an eyebrow slightly. It cleared. I know. It wasn't about the amount. I figured that. It was about timing. Yes. They held eye contact. No defensiveness, no accusation, just acknowledgement of a moment that shifted trajectory. He stepped closer again. You don't need me financially the way you did. She shook her head slightly. I never needed you that way. The distinction mattered. He absorbed it fully. What do you need then? He asked. She didn't hesitate. Partnership, clear, uncomplicated. He nodded slowly. I can do that. She studied him carefully. It's not something you declare. It's something you show. I will. Another pause. Then she said softly, we both growing. He exhaled, almost relieved. Yes, we are. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation, just a shift in dynamic. He had returned, expecting to resume control. Instead, he stepped into recalibration, and recalibration requires humility. He glanced toward the hallway again. When's the next appointment? Next Tuesday. I'll be there. She nodded once. Okay. The maturity in that single word sealed the moment. Not forgiveness. Alignment. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual. Not tense. Reflective. Dinner was simple. Grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables. Alex insisted on cooking. Jane didn't argue. They moved around each other carefully in the kitchen, rediscovering physical proximity after weeks apart. At one point, he reached for a plate at the same time she did. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away quickly. Later, as the sun dipped behind neighboring houses, they carried 2 glasses of water onto the porch. Texas air wrapped around them warmly. Jane lowered herself slowly into the porch chair, adjusting until comfortable. Alex sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The neighborhood carried familiar sounds. A passing car, distant laughter, a dog barking 2 streets over. Normal life. Alex broke the silence first. When did it shift for you? He asked quietly. She didn't pretend not to understand. The day I saw the account balance, she replied. He nodded once. I figured it wasn't the number. I know. It was what it represented. He turned slightly toward her. What did it represent? She rested both hands over her stomach. That I couldn't assume timing would always favor me. He absorbed that slowly. You think I assumed too much? I think you trusted structure more than presence. He didn't resist the statement. That's fair. She looked at him. I wasn't angry. I know. I was aware. He nodded again. I felt that from a distance. She raised an eyebrow slightly. You did? Yes. How? Your tone changed. She considered that. Not colder, he clarified. Just steadier. That's what clarity does. He exhaled softly. I've always equated security with numbers. I know. But security ain't just numbers. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was grounded. It's showing up when it matters. He leaned back in his chair and looked out at the fading sky. In my world, absence for opportunity was normal. In mine, Absence meant something was off. The contrast was spoken without hostility, just understanding. He turned toward her again. I don't want you to ever feel like you have to prepare alone. She studied him carefully. I don't mind preparing, she said. I mind doing it without acknowledgement. That's what I missed. Yes. The baby shifted again, visible beneath her dress. Alex instinctively placed his hand over her stomach. The movement slowed beneath his palm. He swallowed. I was proud watching those videos, he admitted. You didn't sound proud on the phone. I sounded surprised. That too. He allowed himself a small smile. You built something significant. I built stability. For yourself. For us. The distinction lingered. He glanced at her. You created a separate category. She didn't flinch. Yes. Security? Yes. He nodded slowly. I saw. I wasn't hiding it. I know. Another pause. That bothered you? She asked. He considered the question honestly. At first, maybe. Not because you did it. Because I realized you felt you needed to. She held his gaze. I need to be able to stand on my own. I want you to. Then we aligned. He exhaled slowly. I had to confront something uncomfortable. What? That providing made me feel indispensable. Her expression softened slightly. You are indispensable, she said. Just not because of money. He looked at her, processing the difference. So what makes me indispensable? Presence, accountability, participation. The words were clear. No embellishment. He nodded once. I can be that. She leaned back slightly in her chair. I believe you can. Belief, not blind trust. That mattered. The sky deepened into evening blue. Porch light flickered on automatically. He shifted in his seat. I want to restructure travel, he said. How? Less extended trips, more coordination around appointments. She didn't respond immediately. Then, that's a start. He accepted that. No grand forgiveness required, just action. After a moment, she spoke again. Growth ain't punishment. I know. It's adjustment. Yes. He turned toward her fully. I don't want to compete with you. You're not. But I don't want to feel replaced. You're not replaceable. The answer came without hesitation. You're responsible for one thing I can't outsource. What? Being father to this child. The statement settled heavily. Responsibility reframed. He sat up straighter. I won't miss that. I won't let you, she replied lightly. There was humor in her tone now, not sharp, warm. They sat in silence again, not empty, grounded. Alex felt something shift internally, not threatened, rebalanced. Providing had been his identity anchor. Now partnership was joining it. He glanced at her once more. When's the due date? Exactly, he asked. She smiled faintly. You finally asking details? Yes. She gave him the date. He repeated it back, committing it to memory. The porch light cast soft glow across their faces. No raised voices, no accusations, no dramatic reconciliation, just recalibration. And recalibration builds differently than confrontation. As night settled fully, Jane rested her head lightly against the back of the chair. I'm tired, she admitted quietly. He stood immediately. Let's go inside. He offered his hand. She accepted it. As they walked back into the house together, the dynamic between them felt altered, not fractured, balanced. And balance is built, not assumed. Upstairs, the nursery waited. Downstairs, two adults had quietly redefined partnership. Soon the baby would arrive, and arrival changes everything. But for now, they were aligned enough to face it together. The invitation arrived by email on a Monday morning. Jane had just finished reviewing analytics when the subject line caught her attention. She opened it carefully. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday. A live panel discussion centered around motherhood, entrepreneurship, and emotional accountability in partnerships. In person. Audience of over 300. Local press confirmed attendance. She leaned back slowly in her chair, not startled. Assessing 7 months had become 8. Her due date was approaching steadily. She forwarded the email to Alex without commentary. Minutes later, he walked into the kitchen holding his phone. You're speaking live? He asked. Yes. This Saturday? Yes. He scanned the details again. That's big, she nodded. They reached out after the last article. He looked at her differently, not surprised now. Aware. Do you want to do it? He asked. I wouldn't consider it if I didn't. He studied her posture. Steady, grounded, prepared. I'll be there, he said. She didn't respond immediately. Then I know. Saturday arrived warm and bright. The venue sat in downtown Houston. Modern, polished, filled with soft lighting and arranged chairs facing a modest stage. Jane adjusted her dress in the reflection of the backstage mirror, her stomach visibly full now, not hidden, not minimized. She placed one hand over it briefly. "You ready?" she murmured softly. A small kick answered. Alex stood a few steps behind her, jacket neatly pressed, eyes focused. "You nervous?" he asked. "No," she replied honestly. "Good." She turned toward him. "You—" He paused. "A little." She smiled faintly. "That's growth." He nodded. "Yes." The audience filled quickly. Women of different ages. Men seated attentively. Media cameras set discreetly near the back. Jane walked onto the stage calmly when her name was announced. Applause followed. Not overwhelming. Respectful. Alex took a seat near the center aisle. From that angle, he could see her clearly. She adjusted the microphone once and began. "I didn't plan to speak publicly about motherhood," she said, "but sometimes growth pushes you forward, whether you're prepared or not." The audience leaned in. She spoke without script, structured, measured, confident. She discussed building independence without resentment, balancing ambition with emotional presence, preparing for motherhood without losing identity. No attacks, no accusations, no dramatics, just clarity. Midway through the panel, a moderator asked, "What changed for you this year?" Jane paused briefly, then answered, "I realized that being capable doesn't mean you should carry everything alone." Alex felt that sentence land. The audience murmured softly in agreement. She continued, "I also learned that security isn't just financial. It's relational." Another ripple of recognition moved through the room. Alex watched her hands as she spoke, open gestures, controlled breathing, direct eye contact. He saw something he hadn't fully recognized before. Authority, not ego. Authority. She wasn't reacting to him. She wasn't proving anything. She was leading a conversation he had once underestimated. When the discussion concluded, applause rose louder. People stood, not because she was loud, because she was clear. Jane stepped off stage and into the aisle. Several women approached her immediately, thanking her, sharing brief stories, requesting photos. Alex remained where he was, watching. One woman turned toward him and said, "You must be proud." He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he replied, and he meant it fully. Jane finally made her way back toward him. "You good?" she asked. He nodded once. "You're different up there." She tilted her head. "How?" "Certain." She smiled faintly. "I've always been certain." He exhaled quietly. "I just didn't always see it." She didn't respond with sarcasm. She placed her hand lightly over his. "You see now?" "Yes." That acknowledgement felt heavier than applause. As they exited the venue together, camera flashes caught briefly from the side. Jane didn't flinch. She walked naturally. Alex noticed something else inside himself. Humility. Not because she had outpaced him, because he had underestimated her scale. He had assumed his role defined stability. Now he understood stability had two pillars, and she had built hers without announcement. In the car ride home, he glanced at her profile against the evening light. "You don't need validation," he said quietly. "No, but you deserve recognition." She looked out the window thoughtfully. "Recognition fades," she replied. "Foundation doesn't." He absorbed that fully. What actually shocked him wasn't her success. It was how grounded she remained within it. No ego, no resentment, no grand declarations, just direction. And direction, when steady, changes everything. The contractions began on a Tuesday evening. No dramatic announcement, no sudden panic. Jane was in the kitchen, reorganizing a small basket of baby blankets she had already folded twice that week. When she paused mid-motion, her hand gripped the counter. Breath slowed. Alex noticed immediately. "You okay?" he asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer right away. She waited, counted, exhaled slowly. "Maybe," she said. Another contraction followed 20 minutes later, this one stronger. Alex was already beside her. "Hospital?" he asked. "Not yet." She leaned into the counter again, eyes closed, breathing steady. He didn't argue. He didn't calculate. He followed her rhythm. An hour passed, then another. By the time the contractions tightened consistently, Alex had already packed the final items into the hospital bag. He moved, without rushing, present When she nodded once, the signal, he helped her into the car, carefully. The drive to the hospital felt shorter than usual. Streetlights blurred past. Neither spoke much. Her breathing filled the car. His hand remained steady on the steering wheel. At the hospital entrance, he parked closer than usual. No hesitation, no distraction. Inside, the check-in process moved quickly. Forms signed, bracelet secured, room assigned. Jane changed into the hospital gown. With assistance from a nurse, Alex stood close but not in the way. Every contraction now demanded focus. She gripped his hand once. Hard. He didn't pull away. He leaned closer instead. "I'm here," he said quietly. She nodded. Another wave hit, stronger. Her body worked with instinct, older than language. Hours blurred. Time measured in breaths and quiet encouragement. At one point, exhaustion crept into her expression. "I don't know," she whispered. "You do," he answered firmly. "You've been building this." She managed a small laugh through pain. "That's not what I meant." "I know," he said softly. He wiped her forehead gently, adjusted the pillows behind her back, listened when nurses gave instructions, followed her cues. There were no business calls, no vibrating phone on the counter, no divided attention, only presence. At some point near dawn, the room shifted. The medical staff moved with sharper focus. "It's time," the nurse said calmly. Jane gripped Alex's hand again. He stepped closer to her shoulder. "You ready?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes tired, determined. Yes. The final push came with effort that felt beyond muscle. It felt ancestral, primal, human. Then a cry. Sharp, clear, alive. The room changed instantly. A nurse placed the newborn briefly on Jane's chest. Jane's eyes filled, not dramatically, but deeply. Alex stood frozen for a split second, then leaned in closer. Their child, small, perfect, breathing. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Jane looked up at him. "You hear?" She whispered softly. "I'm here," he said. And this time, there was no distance between words and truth. The nurse cleaned and wrapped the baby gently before placing the child into Alex's arms. He hesitated only a fraction before accepting. The weight felt impossibly light and impossibly significant at the same time. He looked down. The tiny fingers curled instinctively. He swallowed. "I won't miss this," he murmured quietly. Jane watched him carefully, not evaluating, observing. He lifted his eyes to hers. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "Security." She didn't answer. He continued. "It's not just numbers." She nodded faintly. The hospital room hummed softly with quiet movement. Morning light filtered through the blinds. No celebration, no spectacle, just grounding. Later, when the room emptied and it was just the three of them, Alex sat beside Jane's bed, holding the baby carefully. "You built more than a platform," he said. She adjusted her position slightly. "I built preparation." He looked at her. "You built legacy." She smiled faintly. "Legacy requires two." He nodded slowly. "Yes." He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss against her forehead, not as reassurance, as gratitude, because what shocked him most wasn't the public recognition. It wasn't the partnerships. It wasn't the headlines. It was this. She had grown stronger without growing distant. She had built independence without building walls, and she had allowed him space to grow instead of punishing him for not understanding sooner. That required maturity he had not fully appreciated before. The baby shifted softly in his arms. He adjusted instinctively. Jane watched the movement. "You look different," she said quietly. "How?" "Less rigid." He almost smiled. "That's your fault." She laughed softly. "I'll take it." Outside the hospital window, the Texas sky stretched wide and steady. Inside that room, something had stabilized. Not perfectly, but honestly. The nurse returned briefly to check vitals. "Everything looks good," she said. Alex nodded once. Everything did look good. But more importantly, everything felt aligned. 3 months later, the house felt fuller, not just with baby supplies and soft blankets draped across furniture, with rhythm, midnight feedings, early morning sunlight creeping through curtains, small coos replacing silence. Jane moved differently now, slower in some ways, stronger in others. Her platform had continued growing, but she adjusted her posting schedule around motherhood deliberately. She no longer uploaded daily reflections. Instead, she shared thoughtful conversations once or twice a week. Quality over volume. One Friday evening, she set up her camera in the living room for a live stream Q&A. Alex sat just outside the frame on the couch, gently rocking the baby in his arms. "You good?" she asked softly, before pressing record. "Always," he replied. She smiled faintly and went live. The comments appeared immediately. Questions scrolled quickly. How do you balance independence and marriage? What changed after your husband came home? How did you move past feeling unsupported? Jane adjusted the microphone slightly and began. "I didn't move past anything," she said calmly. "I moved through it." The comments slowed slightly as viewers listened. "When I saw that $20 balance that day," she continued, "it wasn't about fear. It was about awareness." She paused deliberately. "Awareness shows you where you stand." Another wave of comments flooded in. "Did you almost leave? Were you angry?" She shook her head lightly. "No, I wasn't angry. I was evaluating." She glanced briefly toward Alex off camera. "Growth isn't about punishing someone else. It's about strengthening yourself." The baby shifted in Alex's arms. He adjusted gently. Jane noticed and smiled. "Partnership doesn't mean dependence," she said. "It means two capable people choosing to show up." The word choose carried weight. A viewer commented, "What advice would you give someone who feels alone in their relationship?" Jane leaned forward slightly. "First, build yourself. Not to compete, not to escape, but to stabilize." She continued. "Second, communicate clearly without hostility. And third, watch actions, not promises." The chat reacted strongly. Hearts, affirmations, agreement. She didn't rush. She didn't dramatize. She grounded every answer. Another question appeared. "What shocked your husband the most?" Jane exhaled softly. "He expected me to wait." She glanced again toward Alex. "He didn't expect me to build." Alex felt that sentence settle in his chest. Not as accusation, as truth. Jane continued. "And what shocked him even more was that I built without resentment." She smiled slightly. "That's the part people misunderstand. Independence doesn't mean rebellion." The comments slowed again. "Did money fix things?" She shook her head. "No, presence did." She didn't look toward Alex this time. She didn't need to. He already understood. Near the end of the live stream, Jane leaned back in her chair slightly. "I want to leave you with something," she said. "When life tests your stability, don't panic. Assess. When someone disappoints you, don't collapse. Clarify. And when opportunity forces growth, don't shrink to keep someone comfortable." The room felt still, even through the screen. She added one final line. "Security isn't what someone gives you. It's what you cultivate within yourself." The chat exploded with gratitude. She thanked everyone calmly and ended the live stream. The screen went dark. Silence returned to the living room. Alex stood slowly and walked into frame. Now that the camera was off, he handed her the baby carefully. "You said that well," he said quietly. "I meant it," she replied. He nodded. "I know." He sat beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "That $20 moment didn't break us." "No," she replied. "It built us." She smiled faintly. "Only because we allowed it to." He leaned back into the couch. "When I left for Europe, I thought I was protecting everything. You were protecting one part and ignoring another." "Yes," he nodded. "I won't do that again." She didn't respond with dramatic reassurance. She simply rested her hand over his. That was enough. Outside, the Texas sky stretched wide beyond the living room windows, sunset painting it in steady shades of gold and deep orange. The same sky that watched her stare at 2034 cents. The same sky that saw him board a flight, convinced he understood security. The same sky that now stretched above a home built on balance. Jane stood slowly, baby in her arms, and walked toward the window. Alex joined her. They stood there together. No dramatic music, no grand declarations, just alignment. She looked at him once more. "What actually shocked you?" she asked softly. He didn't hesitate. "That you didn't need me to survive." She held his gaze. "But you chose me anyway." He nodded. "Yes, that was the real story. Not abandonment, not revenge, not collapse. Choice. Two capable people choosing presence, choosing accountability, choosing growth." The $20 had never been the problem. It had been the mirror, and mirrors don't destroy. They reveal. As the sky darkened and lights flickered on inside the house, Jane whispered softly to the baby in her arms, "You always build from clarity." Alex heard it, and this time he understood.